Please help me welcome J Loren Norris.
It's amazing to me how many people can lose a game, lose a match, lose an election, lose a sale, lose a relationship. And on the backside of it, they only have evidence of cheating, misconduct, misbehavior. Something is wrong with the opponent. I didn't do anything wrong. There's always time to ask the question, how could I have done better? In leadership, it's absolutely essential, and that's what we're going to talk about in this episode of Leading Leaders. Subscribe now for our extensive video library of leadership lessons promoting faith, family, and freedom. I'm J Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast. And many times in my life, I have attempted something and just fallen short of it. Lost a game, lost a match, lost a tournament. I've competed in championship speaking twice now in high levels. The Toastmasters World Championship of Public Speaking in 2012, 35,000 contestants entered that, and I finished in the top 82. I was in the semifinals. Also, in the Great American Speak Off with Grant Cardone and Pete Vargas, I competed in that one 2 years ago. Again, almost 30,000 people worldwide joined into that competition, and we got down to the final 125-ish, and I was out then. Of course, they had a couple more rounds after that, so that can't be called the semifinalists, but I did finish in the top 1%-ish of the whole field. And so I know what it means to compete at a high level, but I also know what it means to lose at that level, because both times I only made it to that top 100, not to the final 3 or 4. Now, the real challenge is to ask yourself the question, when you get to that place, when you've succeeded and succeeded and succeeded and then failed, why did you fail? What could you have done better? What did you do wrong? Now, I know that there are people who play football in the backyard on Thanksgiving Day. There are people who play football in the front yard on Thanksgiving Day. That's a big step up because now all your neighbors can see you. There are people who play football in college and high school. There are people who actually make it to the NFL. I have several friends that have played in the NFL, and most of them will tell you that NFL stands for not for long. Most people are not Tom Brady. They don't play for half of their life in the NFL. Most people are not Tom Brady. They don't have 6 Super Bowl rings. There's only a handful of people in the world who have more rings than the average team has. That's not normal. That's an exception to the rule. But the rule is that if you're going to get better, you've got to ask yourself, what did I do wrong last time? If I lost last time, what could I do better this time? How do I improve? And the challenge for a lot of leaders is they're just not willing to ask that question. Either they don't want to know, or they're so terrified of the answer, or they've been raised with a mentality, a mindset that says, it's not my problem, it's everybody else. And you can see that as a victim mentality, or you can see that as an ego problem. They're very, very close to being the same thing. Not being willing to take responsibility or to take ownership of those things that have gone wrong, that's a major character flaw. But it's a flaw that a lot of people have. Some because that was the way they were raised, that it's not really your fault, it's going to be okay, we'll work past this or walk past this. There are many people who, through the course of their life, have never been asked to take responsibility for the choices that they made, for the decisions they've made, the relationships they built, the business transactions they've been involved in. And if you're not willing to look at those things and go, yeah, I did that, you're not going to be able to fix the problem that you had. If you're not willing to look at it and say, there are consequences for the decision that I made, and I'm willing to accept and face those consequences. If you're not willing to do that, then those consequences are just going to keep coming back until you deal with them. There's an old phrase that says, you'll just keep taking the same test you're taking until you pass it. And if you failed the test of integrity and character in your leadership, you're going to get to take that test again and again and again and again and again. Now, there will always be those people who stand outside of your life, outside of your core relationships, and they kind of look at you and they point a finger. And a lot of times that finger pointing has nothing to do with the truth. It's an accusation against you because of their own position in life, because they're jealous of your success, because they don't like the way you go about things, because they don't want to see you succeed in the path that you're succeeding in, because that was the path they wanted to succeed in. I've competed against people that when they lost the competition, they completely gave up. And I've been tempted to do the same thing. I remember sitting in a Starbucks and a guy walked into me and he saw me sitting there and he was in his work uniform for the job that he had. He walked past me and he saw me sitting there and he walked over and put his hands on my table and leaned right down in my face and he said, "When I lost to you, I realized not only was I out of my league, I had no business competing in that particular field." And I thought, well, that's not necessarily true. I mean, there's 16 teams in the NFL. At some point, many of them have lost to Tom Brady, and some of them have beat Tom Brady. What if somebody like a Tom Brady or a Dak Prescott or an Aaron Rodgers took the attitude that, oh, well, I lost to the likes of you, and so I'm just done. I'm ending my career. I'll quit this path. I'll stop searching for what could I do better. Well, that's a losing attitude from the get-go. There's no way to fix that until you fix your mindset and fix your attitude. Could you have competed better? Could you have done something better? I'm not the superstar. I'm not the only guy who will ever win at this. In fact, it was in that season of competition that I only made it to the semifinals. I didn't win the whole thing anyway. But to think that the one contest where we competed should make the difference of whether you can continue to compete or not, well, that's just silly. In fact, that's just self-focused. That's selfishly saying, if I can't have it all this time, then I won't play at all. Or, if I can't have it my way, I'll sabotage your success to make sure that you can't succeed, that you can't win either. That's a horrible attitude to go through life with. And it's certainly not a quality of leadership that anybody wants to spend any time around. If I can't have it my way, I'll destroy it for anybody else. I was just reading this morning in Dale Carnegie's Effective Public Speaking. He was talking about a guy who had, and this is just an anecdote, but he had gone to the doctor and said, I have this cat inside me that's just tearing me up. And after all the exams and all of the looks and MRIs and x-rays or whatever they had at the turn of the century for that, the turn of the 1800s to 1900s, whatever technologies they had to look for a cat inside someone, they did it all. And so they referred him to a psychiatrist. And he went to the psychiatrist and said, I have this cat inside of me, it's just tearing me up, and I've got to get rid of this cat. And so the doctor put him under and mocked a surgery. And when he came out of the ether, when he came to, they handed him a black cat and said, we found the cat, your problems are solved. And the man completely freaked out and said, no. The cat that's been terrorizing me from inside is gray. This can't be the cat. You're trying to solve a problem that's not a real problem in the first place. But if even when a solution is presented, you're so convinced that the problem is bigger than anybody can solve, it's going to be really hard for anybody to solve it. Dare I say, potentially impossible. But there are some things that you can do individually as a leader, some things you can ask yourself, some areas that you can look at. John Maxwell, in his nifty little book called What Successful People Know About Leadership. Now, this is not a big fat book. This is not a 5-day read or 6-month study kind of book. Altogether, I think it's, 151 pages. But we only get to page 7. We only get to page 7 before he starts asking some really tough questions. I'm going to share a couple of these questions with you. He says, if I can get to the right page. He says, do you miss deadlines often? Do you make vows, resolutions, and decisions to change and then go back to your old behavior? Do you place more importance on pleasing others than you do on maintaining the values that you espouse? Are you willing to shave or shade the truth in order to get out of a tough spot? Do you do what's easiest when you know it's not what's best? Do others show reluctance to trust you? If your answer to any of these questions is yes, these may be areas of weakness in your character that need some work. How to overcome your blind spots. Number one, assume you have blind spots. That's pretty wise. If you don't believe that you have blind spots, that is your blind spot. Number two, ask those who know you best to identify your blind spots. If they're honest, they will tell you what you aren't seeing about yourself. I'm going to give you the 4 blind spots that he really encourages leaders to focus on. Again, in this book, this is the first 7 pages of the book. He says, number 1, a singular perspective. Number 2, insecurity. Number 3, an out-of-control ego. And number 4, a weak character. Can you imagine if you were to ask yourself the tough questions about your own character, your own ego, your own self-perspective? One of the things that I know about people who are really self-focused is that they tend to always drive the conversation back to what's important to them, or specifically to them. They could walk into a conversation about mushrooms and olives on pizza, whether they belong there next to the pineapples or not. And in the middle of that conversation, they will insert themselves. And before the conversation is over and the debate is settled, mushrooms, olives, pizza with pepperoni and pineapple, yes or no, before that conversation is settled, the conversation will be about them. Their limited perspective and heightened ego says, I only want to talk about me. They only have a solution if it comes from them. They are not a problem. They are the answer to everybody else's problem. I remember growing up around people like this. I remember for a season of my life being the kind of person like this. I felt like if I was going to win in sales, I had to always dominate the conversation. I had to always be in front of that. I had to always let people know who I am, what I think, and why I'm here. I found a solution that's podcast. I also found the solution of realizing that, just like all these books behind me, I don't have every thought. I don't have every idea. Sometimes I need to go pursue those thoughts and those ideas, those opinions, those experiences, those knowledge bits, those wisdom nuggets from somebody else. Sometimes, ready for this? From people I don't like. Sometimes I have to read books by people that just make your skin crawl. The kind of people that their ideas are not like my ideas, but they're valid ideas. It's the leader who's a little bit insecure, the leader who's convinced that if I'm not taking the stage, grabbing the mic, standing in front, taking control, if I'm not in charge, then I'm not being given my due. And if my ideas are not the only ideas that are being espoused and everybody's following my ideas and everybody's executing my plan, my strategy, if that's not the case, then I lose and I might as well just go get another job. Well, that's not the case. Just like my friend who decided to step out of the competition, completely leave the field, and I don't just mean the competitive field, I mean, he left the whole notion of what we were doing, what we were competing against, to go get a job that didn't suit him. I mean, I'm sure part of that was I had to pay the bills, but he completely gave up on what 6 months ago he would have called his dream. Well, that's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking that you would give up, but it's also a sign that the ego was so big that it was bruised when it lost. If you're insecure because your ego is that large, if you feel like the only perspective that's right is your perspective, you got some soul searching to do. As a leader, you're going to have to step back from that a little bit and go, okay, well, what harm is there in hearing other people's opinions? What if somebody has an idea I disagree with and I discover later they're right and I was wrong? How will I handle that? How do you handle correction? If somebody calls you out in front of a crowd and says, you were wrong. It's been a few years ago, but there was a time that I watched someone do something from the stage that involved my equipment. They mistreated, in my opinion, they mistreated my microphone, put it on the table, it rolled off, bounced off the stage, landed on the floor, and it cracked the case to my microphone. And I was actually quite upset about that because that's my equipment. That's the equipment I make my livelihood with. I need it to work. And microphones are not cheap to replace. If you haven't checked that out, a single handheld microphone and what it takes to run it, the microphone and the receiver unit and the system, that can be $700 to $1,000 to have a quality microphone. I was a little upset about it. And so when the opportunity came to give feedback for the presentation that was there and the panel that was up there, one of the things I said was really quite insulting to this individual. And I said, not everybody is going to get exactly what they want when they step on the stage, but don't let your ego cause you to mistreat other people just because your ego is so big. Well, this individual had told me, I want a lav mic. And I'm like, I only have two. They're already assigned to other people. The host of the event told me to give those two lav mics to those two people and that you would be fine with a handheld. He said, I don't do a handheld. And so he chucked it on the table, it rolled off and it bounced on the floor. And I was like, that's just pure ego. You're just too good to use the kind of equipment that's been offered. And since we were training a room full of other speakers, I said, that's a really bad approach. To have the ego that I deserve X, even though the host didn't say that, you didn't have that communication with the host, to have that expectation on the sound guy, that's kind of harsh. I recommend that you not. I also recommend that you use the microphone that's presented to you because chances are the whole thing's being recorded and you talking in the open air means your voice isn't on the recording. The video sees you, but nobody can hear you on the playback. That's just rude to the people who have to watch it later. So the whole thing was about the ego of that speaker, and I felt that, and I saw that, and a lot of people in the room witnessed that, and a lot of people were making notes on how you can navigate through that as I spoke about it from the stage. And then I thought better of it overnight. And the next day I realized it's not enough for me to go to that individual and say, dude, I was out of line. I blew that way out of proportion. It didn't need to be that big a deal. A side conversation would have been fine. I took that moment not just to address an issue that the crowd needed to hear, but to make an example out of you, and that was wrong. And I could have done that on the side. I could have done that over a cup of coffee. I could have done that in an email or even a text because we have a text conversation. But I realized that it would be very disingenuous and even minimizing of my inappropriate behavior to take the magnitude of my chastisement and squeeze it through the toothpaste tube of a very small apology. It would be like if a news organization ran a headline, a massive headline for several weeks in a row and went, this is true, this is true, this is true, this is true. And then after several weeks or months, came back and did an apology on the last page of the paper or on the end of a broadcast at the fine print of their post to say, yeah, well, it wasn't. And I didn't feel like this individual, as my friend, as an acquaintance, as a fellow professional in this industry who's way further up the food chain than I am, it didn't seem appropriate to simply pull them aside and go, hey, I'm sorry. But instead, I humiliated myself, to be honest with you. I went onto the stage earlier in the morning when the entire crowd was there, and I said, hey, yesterday I said something that didn't need to be said. I don't think it was untrue. I don't think it was wrong. I don't think I should have not said it. It just was unnecessary and inappropriate. It was one of those things, as Bill Engvall says, I should have shut up. It would have been better left unsaid or said in a whisper in a corner. And because I said it publicly, I want to apologize publicly. And my friend was in the room and he heard that apology. And he later came to me and he said, look, dude, if your microphone doesn't work after it bounced off the stage and onto the floor, send me an invoice. I'm glad to pay for it. And you're right. What you said was inappropriate and had no business in the public place. And I appreciate you being willing to stand in the same place and apologize. I'm going to ask you this, not that I'm any standard of measure. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, if you're a leader and you're unwilling to acknowledge when you're wrong, if you're a leader and your character doesn't allow you to go, yeah, I screwed up, my bad. If you're a leader and you're unwilling to say to somebody else, I'm sorry, at the same volume, in the same arena, in the same atmosphere that you wounded them, that you hurt them, that you mistreated them, that you took advantage of them, if you're not willing to stand up and go, my bad, I'll fix it, what does that say to you about you? Are you the kind of leader who will make a headline kind of mistake and then bury the apology on the last page in the fine print? Are you the kind of leader who will tell the world an accusation that you later discover is untrue and then never admit that it was not true in the first place? I know for a fact there are anchor persons, anchor men, it was an anchor man specifically that comes to mind when I think of this, who made multiple accusations and declarations about a political candidate. It's been over a decade ago now, almost two. But when that declaration was made over and over and over again, took their platform as a leading news anchor and said, these facts are true. And later when it came out, those facts were not true. That news anchor said, yeah, but that person's not our president, so I win. And I thought to myself, you sold your career, you sold your integrity, you sold the trust of the people down the river to change the outcome of an election. I mean, there's all kinds of federal laws against that. Set that aside. The reality is, you had the chance to do what was right. You had the chance to apologize. You had the chance to correct. And although you screamed from the mountaintops what you knew to be untrue when you said it, not only did you continue to say it, but you never apologized for doing it. That's a failure in personal leadership. That's exactly what John Maxwell is talking about in this little tiny book on page 7 when he says, are you willing to shave or shade the truth in order to get out of a tough spot? Do you do what's easiest even when you know what is not best? Do others show reluctance to trust you? Well, the answer to all of those would be yes, if you're willing to lie the size of headlines and apologize in the fine print. If you're willing to take advantage of people to get what you want, if you're always putting your name out front, not listening to the opinions and ideas of others, that's a character flaw. You should work on that. I know, because I had it. I'm not saying I'm perfect. I'm not saying I'm done with it. I'm just saying that came into my awareness, and I've been dealing with it. And I know who I am, and so I pay more attention to that. I challenge you as a leader to ask yourself the question, am I dealing with the same thing? Do I have blind spots that I won't address? Have I told headline-sized lies and made closed caption sized apologies? If that's your tendency right now, I challenge you to do better. You know better. Do better. I'm J Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast, or Tell It Like It Is TV. Have a blessed day. Subscribe now for our extensive video library of leadership lessons promoting faith, family, and freedom. I encourage you to go to storypoweracademy.com and check it out. Look at the different classes, the different levels, the different things that are available. You can take a lot of them a la carte. But spend some time there and see if that's the kind of thing that would change the way you communicate as a leader, as a pastor, as a counselor, as a political leader. And if that will help you, I'd love to have a conversation with you. Again, only 10 people in the elite speakers. You will have to apply for that. But if you're a candidate, I'd love to have that conversation with you. I'm J Loren Norris with Story Power Academy. I look forward to seeing you inside.